Hey there, welcome back. I'm Christopher, and this is Animal Attacks. In this episode, I'll examine what happens when safari rules are not followed by people. From a woman who disobeyed a simple rule, making her a victim of a lion, to a camping trip that attracted an aggressive predator. But first, let's start with the last moments of safari influencer Anna Kings. It was June 3, 2025, at a private game reserve in the South African Bushveld, where a pride of lions had settled beside a dry track barely 30 feet from the nearest vehicle. The morning air was still the kind of quiet that settles over the veld before the sun reaches full height when predators often rest after a night of movement. Anna Kings, 26, had built a travel-focused social media channel through a steady stream of wildlife content. She was known for high-quality footage and a willingness to seek out moments that other creators wouldn't attempt. She had developed a reputation among guides for treating safety instructions as obstacles rather than protections. In one documented case the previous year, a guide had physically pulled her back inside a vehicle after she attempted to lean out while filming a leopard. Many people who have traveled with her described her as a woman who believed good content comes from ignoring the rules in dangerous areas. At this point, I already know the problem in this situation. It is not the lion that's the problem. It's the mindset of the person who is going through that encounter. The morning group was briefed clearly before departure. Remain seated, keep all body parts inside the vehicle, follow the guide's instructions without exception. The guide who delivered that briefing had over 12 years of experience on that reserve. He was not an alarmist, he was specific. When the vehicle pulled over near the lion pride, one lioness kept her eyes open, actively watching and alert. Positioned approximately 25 feet from the passenger side, the guide, doing his job, reminded everyone to stay inside the vehicle strictly. Habituation does not mean taming. Lions in these areas, especially reserves, became very familiar with these vehicles, treating them as a single neutral entity. Once a movement of a human body extends beyond that so-called whole entity, everything changes. Anna, being who she is, lowered her window completely and leaned her head, shoulder, and upper torso outside the vehicle to get that dramatic up-close footage. The guide ordered her back inside. She did not comply, instead pushing herself further out, her upper body now fully past the window frame, one arm extended. Now, you do not have to deny it. What she is doing is absolutely stupid. Just for footage of an animal, you can film with a much safer approach. The lioness rose to her feet, her ears flattened, her head dropped low, and her gaze locked onto the figure hanging from the vehicle. Her weight shifted backward, a loaded posture that experienced guides recognize as the final pre-charge state. The lioness covered the 25 feet in just under 2 seconds. She hit the side of the vehicle at full speed and seized Anna by the head and upper shoulder through the window opening. A mature lioness carries between 265 and 395 pounds behind that strike, and the bite force of a lion is strong enough to crush bone the way a human hand crushes paper. When the impact hit, it rocked the vehicle sideways and slammed Anna back against the interior of the vehicle. Passengers reported a single explosive impact, and then screaming that stopped abruptly within seconds of contact. The guide floored the accelerator, and the lioness released it. Anna was still partially inside the vehicle but had sustained catastrophic injuries, crushed trauma to the skull and cervical spine from the initial bite force, and severe lacerations across her neck and shoulder. One of the passengers had gone through medical training. They attempted to maintain pressure on Anna's neck during the drive, in the hopes of saving her. The guide radioed emergency services immediately and drove toward the reserve entrance at speed. Anna was still breathing but with complications when they reached the road. But she unfortunately succumbed to her injuries before emergency team could reach her. Reserve staff and investigators later confirmed that every protocol had been followed by the guide. Every warning had been issued. The failure was singular and deliberate. One person who chose at the critical moment movement to push further out instead of pulling back in. It was the first fatality on that reserve in its 19-year history. In the weeks that followed, the reserve conducted a full internal review of its vehicle safety procedures. The outcome of that review wasn't a change to any rule. Every rule had already been correct. Everything was right. It was perfect for everyone. Until one person decided it was the perfect time to break a rule just to get a video. The next had no safari vehicle, no guide, and no framework of rules at all. It was September 10, 2014, on a rural property in Nevada, where a full-grown male African lion paced the interior of a metal enclosure behind chain-link fencing. The property had no official designation as an exotic animal facility. It operated entirely under the radar because Nevada's regulations at the time placed the burden of enforcement on individual counties, many of which lacked the staff or resources to monitor private exotic animal ownership consistently. Peter Kessler, 33, ran a small social media channel built around exotic animals. He had raised the lion from a cub, posting videos of the two of them roughhousing that were popular with his audience. He regularly told viewers the lion was harmless, presenting their sessions as proof of a unique bond. Friends, neighbors, and veterinarians had all warned him as the animal matured that the behavior was becoming dangerous. A veterinarian submitted a written concern to state wildlife authorities 8 months before the incident, noting that the animal had charged the cage door twice during a single appointment. Peter dismissed every warning, and this is one of the most dangerous illusions people go through in these moments. Confusion, familiarity, thinking they have full control of the animal. Adult male African lions weigh between 330 and 500 pounds. An adult male that has spent years being physically handled by a human does not process roughhousing the way a cub does. It processes it as a dominance challenge. In the months before September, the lion had begun charging the enclosure door during feeding and vocalizing aggressively when Peter approached. Peter interpreted this as moodiness. You have to understand about that period. Months before the incident, the behavior of the lion was already shifting, making it obvious that it is not safe anymore. People who knew Peter and had seen the animal described a clear and escalating pattern. The lion was louder, more reactive, and visibly more agitated during interactions that previously produced no response at all. And no upgrades were ever done to the animal's enclosure, even after it grew. What had been adequate for a juvenile was undersized for a full-grown adult male, and the confinement itself likely contributed to the animal's increasing agitation. On September 14th, Peter entered the enclosure alone to film a new video recreating the old wrestling sessions. He brought the feeding bowl in with him and propped his phone against the interior fence to record. The lion displayed a very stiff posture, looking directly at Peter without blinking its eyes, watching every move he made. But Peter simply ignored it, set down the bowl, and got closer to the animal to make contact with it, simply treating it like a pet dog. At that moment, the lion moved in a swift motion, making contact with Peter's hand. Not one vocalization, not one bluff charge. It simply dropped its weight and drove forward, taking Peter to the ground in a single motion. A neighbor present on the property described hearing the impact on a sound she compared to a car door slamming on pavement. The lion pinned him and delivered a bite to the back of the neck, the instinctive kill strike used to sever the cervical spine of prey within the first several seconds. The neighbor called emergency services immediately, but by the time the call connected, the outcome was no longer in question. Authorities arrived at the place and found the lion standing over Peter's dead body at the center of the enclosure. The propped phone had recorded the full sequence of the attack, making it even more bone-chilling. The footage was not released publicly, but its existence was confirmed in the official incident report. And sadly, the animal was seized and was shut down to avoid further incidents. One person died inside a cage he built himself, with an animal he raised himself, because he never accepted that the relationship had changed. The next didn't own an animal at all. He walked into one's territory in the dark and never walked back out. It was November 8, 2016, in a remote section of a protected conservation zone in Zimbabwe, where game trails converged near a watering area that rangers had flagged for recent lion activity. Drought conditions that season had concentrated animal movement around the remaining water sources, making the area both highly active and exceptionally dangerous after dark. Callum Kurt, 41, was a mechanic with prior arrests for wildlife-related offenses, including involvement in a commercial bushmeat operation dismantled 2 years earlier. He was known to rangers in the region. He had avoided prosecution on a prior entry violation through a procedural issue and appeared to have interpreted that outcome as confirmation that enforcement couldn't reach him. He came with 2 of his associates into the zone after the sun had fallen to check on the snare traps placed earlier in the week. They moved without lights to avoid detection. Poaching activity carries a compounding danger that rarely gets discussed seriously. The men checking snares tend to think of themselves as navigating the wildlife, not operating inside it. They move with focused, mechanical purpose and routinely fail to account for the predators using the exact same corridors, the exact same trails, and the exact same prey concentrations that make a snare line worth running. The snare line Callum was running that night sat along a section of trail that rangers had internally flagged as one of the highest risk corridors in the zone during dry season. Being in the area where the water source was 200 meters away, converging game trails, and documented lion movement in the preceding week made this location a danger zone. Even rangers do not move in these areas without vehicle support. Callum had been running snares in the area long enough to know the terrain well. What he apparently did not account for, or chose not to account for, was that the same conditions that made the trail productive for snaring also made it productive for lions. Walking blind in this area where predators lurk at night isn't an exploration. It is playing with luck and death. Late that night, Callum was moving in the area to check the snares that had been set. He moved towards one of the traps to check if anything had been captured. Noticeably, the smell of a dead carcass was lingering in the area, but it was believed that Callum thought this was an injured animal that was caught in the trap. So, he continued, trying to see what was captured. Lions feeding on a kill are among the most dangerous wildlife encounters possible. A feeding lion is an active resource defense, elevated aggression, zero tolerance for any perceived competitor, and no behavioral warning sequence before a charge. What Callum was walking toward was not a caught antelope. A lion had reached the snare before he did. Like a horror movie, Callum was not walking towards a dead animal, but was walking towards a lion that reached the snare before he did. When his flashlight beam finally swept wide enough to illuminate the scene, he was already within 12 feet. The lion was crouched over the carcass, head up, eyes reflecting the light directly back at him. For a fraction of a second, neither of them moved. Then the lion launched not a clean direct charge, but a low, explosive burst, coming in fast and angled from the far side of the kill. Callum threw himself sideways and got a step back before it hit him. He went down hard. His 2 companions, positioned further back on the trail, heard the impact and several seconds of sounds they couldn't fully describe. And then his voice cut off. They fled without intervening and reported to authorities the following morning, placing themselves in a difficult legal position given that all 3 had entered the zone illegally. Rangers found the scene at first light. The incident was incorporated into regional ranger training as a direct example of how poaching activity intersects with predator risk in ways that consistently prove fatal for those at the lowest level of the operation. It is sad to think that 2 of his companions could not do anything, but if they dared to intervene, well, they would have been one of the fatalities too. The next happened in full daylight on a legal safari with a professional guide sitting 3 feet away because the person in the vehicle decided that the rules were for everyone else. It was July 21st, 2017, at a privately operated safari reserve in South Africa's Limpopo region where a mid-morning game drive had placed a small group of visitors alongside a large male lion moving directly along the vehicle track. The Limpopo Bushveld in July is dry and open visibility is high, the grass has thinned, and wildlife moves through the terrain with confidence. Gavin Peterson, Thyri 8, worked in real estate and had built a minor online following around the persona of someone who didn't let regulations get in the way of a good story. He regularly posted from restricted areas and bragged openly about ignoring rules. Before the drive, all guests were briefed that leaning outside the vehicle and attempting to attract wildlife were strictly prohibited. What's shocking is that Gavin built this identity around this behavior. He arrived already planning to treat the briefing as optional. The guide later told investigators that Gavin had been restless throughout the drive, shifting in his seat, leaning slightly toward the window during sightings, filming at angles that put his phone partially outside the frame. Nothing that crossed the line clearly enough to justify stopping the drive, but enough that the guide had made a mental note to watch him. The lion appeared on the track and moved alongside the stationary vehicle at no more than 10 or 12 feet, an extraordinary sighting that required nothing from the passengers to be remarkable. That wasn't enough. As the lion drew level with the passenger side, Gavin leaned far outside the vehicle with his arm extended and began waving it repeatedly, trying to get the animal to turn its head toward the camera. And this is just actually stupid. Imagine trying to get a predator's attention. A wild predator can instantly take you down. The guide ordered him back inside immediately. Gavin continued. The lion, which had been moving past, stopped walking, its head turned toward the vehicle. Lions treat a safari vehicle as a single, neutral object the moment something moves independently from it. Especially with the repetitive, irregular motion of a waving arm, it registers as a separate and unfamiliar stimulus. The lion's ears rotated forward. Its tail went rigid. The lunge was instantaneous. The lion came off its feet and drove directly toward the arm, seizing Gavin's forearm and wrist in its jaws and wrenching downward with the full torque of its neck. The guide accelerated hard and the lion released. The forearm came back through the window with catastrophic vascular damage, the brachial artery severed at the upper arm, bones fractured, tissue destroyed from the wrist upward. Passengers applied pressure immediately using clothing, a jacket, anything they could compress against the wound. The blood loss was severe and fast. There's only a short window where an injury like that can even be managed out in the field. It takes constant, direct pressure on the wound and a trauma team that can get there almost immediately. In this case, they were able to slow the bleeding, but not fully control it, and the nearest proper trauma facility was still too far away. Gavin lost consciousness before the vehicle reached the reserve entrance. The guide radioed ahead and drove as hard as the track would allow. Emergency services met them on the road and took over immediately, but the blood volume lost by that point had already pushed past the threshold that intervention could reverse. He was immediately airlifted, but he succumbed to his injuries during the transfer. He was pronounced dead at the trauma facility shortly after they arrived. Reserve officials incorporated the incident into all future visitor safety briefings. The rule didn't change. One person's arm went out that window and the outcome followed it. The next had every opportunity to stay safe and dismantled each one of them across an entire evening before he ever stepped outside the tent. It was August 18, 2013 in northern Botswana's Chobe region, where the dry season had concentrated wildlife movement along narrow game trails cutting through dense mopane scrub. Chobe carries significant lion populations that use the same dry season corridors as prey animals, moving between water sources along routes that cut directly through campsites and hiking tracks used by tourists. Jake Holloway, 29, ran an adventure travel blog built around the idea that official camping areas sanitize the wilderness experience. He had posted multiple entries about ignoring ranger recommendations in other parks, framing regulation as a commercial conspiracy designed to funnel tourists toward paid operators. He had ignored advice twice without serious consequence, and that track record had hardened his position completely by the time he reached Chobe. Traveling with two friends, he convinced the group to set up camp on a known game trail that local guides had flagged specifically for lion activity. A guide who encountered them that afternoon tried to redirect them to a designated site less than 4 kilometers away. Jake told him flatly they weren't interested in the tourist experience. The group cooked meat over an open fire, left food residue, cooking equipment near the campsite, and just placed food out in the open. And of course, they positioned themselves on the downwind side of the trail, making the smell go everywhere, especially towards the nocturnal predators corridor. Designated campsites exist because decades of experience showed where food smells, water proximity, and wildlife corridors overlap. Camping on a flagged lion trail after cooking meat and leaving scraps out isn't authentic. It's a stack of compounding risks with no upside. This is why you do not go camping where you do not even know the simplest rule when it comes to this activity, especially around areas where predators lurk. What investigators later reconstructed from the physical evidence was that the lion had entered the camp perimeter well before Jake woke up. Track impressions around the cooking equipment indicated the animal had moved through the camp slowly, pausing near the food residue, and had been within a few meters of the tent while the group was still asleep. When the encounter unfolded, it was just the lion accidentally running into the camp while walking around. The camp had simply drawn it towards that area and then delivered a person into the open at close range. Late in the night, Jake heard slow movement through the scrub near the tent and the sound of something contacting the cooking equipment. He lay still briefly, convinced himself it was a hyena or small antelope, then grabbed a flashlight, unzipped the tent, and stepped outside to look. Just that one decision, going alone at night in a lion country after every warning has been set, it is just plain tomfoolery. A lion had moved along the game trail into the camp, drawn by the established route it traveled and the unfamiliar smells left out from the evening. When the tent opened and Jake stepped out, both of them were in the same open space at close range with no barrier between them. The lion reacted immediately, driving forward and taking Jake down before he could process what he was looking at. His two companions, woken by the sounds, retreated to their vehicle and waited until dawn to contact rangers. Evidence gathered that morning confirmed the lion had entered the camp prior to the attack and was moving along its established route when the encounter occurred. Rangers emphasized afterward that designated campsites existed specifically to prevent this exact sequence of events. The danger wasn't sudden. It was built across an entire evening, one bad decision at a time. The next never left her own property. She had fencing, enclosures, and 6 years of experience, and the outcome was the same. It was April 11th, 2018, on a rural property in East Texas, where a privately maintained exotic animal collection sat behind wooden fencing and chain link enclosures. The property sat in a county where exotic animal ownership was governed at the local level and enforcement was effectively non-existent. Texas had and continues to have one of the largest private exotic animal populations in the United States. Marissa Lacombe, 35, had built her collection over 6 years, eventually acquiring big cats through a private network operating in the legal gray area that existed in Texas at the time. She maintained publicly that her animals were fully tame and frequently rejected professional safety advice. One veterinarian who examined her lion 3 months before the incident refused to continue working with her unless she modified her handling practices. Look, she did not agree. She simply found a different vet instead, just so she can avoid the modification she needed to do. The lion was between 3 and 4 years old by April 2018, sexually mature and close to full size. What is important to understand about that age range in captive big cats is that it represents one of the most dangerous transitions in the entire arc of private ownership. The animal is no longer juvenile enough to be physically manageable in a struggle, but it has also spent enough time around humans to have learned that certain behaviors, pushing, testing, charging, don't produce consequences. That mix of rapid growth, strength, and a lack of consistent handling or correction is exactly why the 3 to 4 year stage is treated with extreme caution by wildlife professionals. In private ownership, this is also the age range where serious incidents most often happen. On April 11th, with several visitors present, Marissa entered the enclosure alone to demonstrate how manageable the animal was. She brought the feeding bowl in to use the mealtime routine as a live demonstration for her guests. The lion was pacing when she entered, and its attention fixed immediately on the bowl. Big cats do not become domesticated through familiarity. They become habituated, tolerant under certain conditions, not all conditions. Feeding is one of the highest risk moments for any interaction with a large predator in captivity. Food drive temporarily overrides social tolerance, and an animal that has allowed handling dozens of times can shift from tolerance to aggression in the time it takes to reach for a bowl. And this is why I do not trust any wild animal. You cannot make the animal turn away from its natural reactions and defensiveness, no matter how long you have been around them. Witnesses described Marissa speaking calmly to the lion, her posture relaxed, apparently reading the situation as normal. When she reached toward the feeding bowl, the lion's body shifted in a single motion, weight forward, head dropping, hindquarters driving. It covered the distance in under a second and drove her to the ground with its full body weight. The initial strike took her to the throat and upper chest. Witnesses outside the enclosure described a few seconds of violent movement and then stillness. The injuries were to the neck and thoracic region, the kind of trauma that does not leave time for a medical response to matter. Guests called emergency services immediately and attempted to find the enclosure latch, but could not operate it quickly enough to enter. By the time help arrived, Marissa had already died from her injuries inside the enclosure. She walked in there in performance mode, in front of an audience, at the exact moment the animal was least likely to behave the way she expected. That combination was fatal. Investigators identified numerous violations involving enclosure design, handling protocols, and safety practices. The enclosure itself did not meet the minimum standards required for an animal of that size and age. Undersized walls, no secondary safety barrier, no emergency protocol of any kind established for the property. Fortunately, the animal was seized and transferred to an accredited wildlife sanctuary instead of being put down. The next had no warning to replace. He just climbed a barrier he wasn't supposed to cross and found the gap that maintenance hadn't filled yet. It was May 30, 2015, at a small, privately operated zoo in Central Europe, a regional facility operating on a limited budget with aging enclosure infrastructure and a security system that relied heavily on staff vigilance rather than automated monitoring. Like many small private zoos on legacy budgets, its physical infrastructure had not kept pace with modern large predator housing standards. Maintenance backlogs had accumulated quietly over years, and the gap between what was documented and what was repaired had grown wider than anyone had fully accounted for. Derek Langford, 24, maintained a small online channel built around pranks and stunts that fed on escalation. He had prior trespassing warnings from a stadium security team and a rail yard. He visited the zoo that afternoon with a group of friends, spending much of the visit joking openly about getting closer to the lions than the barriers allowed. A keeper noticed the group lingering near the lion habitat, but was called away for end-of-day duties before approaching them. They already saw something. They noticed. They had a moment, but it was too short for an encounter to really put their hand on the situation. Zoo enclosures for large predators use layered separation, a public barrier, a secondary restricted maintenance corridor, then the enclosure itself. The public barrier is designed to keep visitors away from the secondary zone entirely. Derek climbed over the public barrier and entered the maintenance corridor, positioning himself directly against the secondary mesh fence and filming through it at close range. He had no way of knowing that part of the lower mesh had corroded loose from its frame at the base, leaving a gap large enough for the lion to push a forelimb through. Maintenance records later confirmed the damage had been noted, but the repair had never been carried out. Lions in captivity are highly alert to movement in service corridors because keepers use them during feeding. One of the lions had been tracking Derek's movement along the fence line from inside the enclosure from the moment he dropped into the corridor. A staff member on end-of-day rounds spotted the breach on a security camera and immediately radioed for a response team. Derek was crouched against the lower section of mesh, adjusting his angle to frame the lion at close range when the animal struck. It drove its forepaw through the corroded gap at the base of the fence, the claws catching his clothing and the left side of his neck and pulling him hard into the mesh before he could pull back. With such powerful force, he was slammed against the fence frame. The lion struck again through the gap, scratching him deeply across his neck a second time with full extension. The second strike caught the carotid region. Derek went down in the corridor away from the fence, which is the only reason the lion could not continue the attack. Staff arrived within 2 minutes of the radio call and found him on the ground, conscious but unresponsive to questions. Blood loss from the neck wounds, already critical. Emergency services were called immediately, but the facility's location meant the ambulance response took longer than the injury would allow. Derek did not survive. The lion was secured inside the enclosure throughout. Unfortunately, Derek did not survive the encounter. The lion was secured inside the enclosure throughout. The post-incident investigation revealed that the corroded mesh section had first been logged 14 months before Derek's visit. It had been relogged twice since then, each time marked for repair, each time deferred. No one had made the decision that the gap was immediately dangerous. It had simply stayed on the list long enough to become one. The facility installed new standoff barriers across the entire service corridor, upgraded its security systems, and submitted a full incident review to regional zoo safety organizations.